were times when Malphite was a little more than a joke to us. Despite Riot setting up their rich world, they never bothered to update what Malphite even was. Some believed he was a literal walking mountain, while his old lore told us that he was an alien from another world. But then, last year with the release of Kiana, they finally fixed Malphite, and he became a canon part of Runeterra. In the story called Roots of a Poison Tree, a group of Zoanite miners were digging for materials in Ishtal. As they dug deeper and deeper, eventually they found a rock none of them recognized. Well, it turned out that rock was Malphite's eye. And Malphite himself was there to warn the miners that should they dig even deeper, they will break the stone that is holding back chaotic creatures. By this he likely meant some kind of Voidborn. Nevertheless, the story portrayed Malphite as an old cool spiritual grandpa. And yet, the story didn't really tell us what he really was. Malphite himself told the miners that he doesn't think he is a mountain, and that he was probably part of one long time ago. He forgot with time. But finally, last week, Riot decided to update Malphite's bio as well. And so now, we finally have all the answers we needed. So without further ado, let's have a look at what even is Malphite. Malphite's bio starts by setting up a bit of history. For more than 2 millennia, Shurima dominated the known world without a hint of challenge from any other region. This was until the day Icathia fell. The Icathians discovered the power of the void sleeping dormant below their soil. But instead of seeing it as a threat to their own lands, they saw it as a weapon to be used to set themselves free from the tyranny of the Shuriman Emperor. On the day Icathia released the power of the void into the physical realm, it is true that Shurima stood no chance against it. But at the same time, the void didn't care for whom it consumes. And so the Icathians who released it also vanished from the face of Runeterra. But even after everyone was gone, the corruption kept spreading. It crawled through the ruins of Icathia, boiling over the land and beneath the oceans, before it finally reached the southern jungles of Ishtal. And here is where the bio mentions a character who may seem familiar to you. Nezuk of the Ascended Host. He was among the most powerful Ishtali elemental mages in history, which unfortunately meant his arrogance was also unrivaled. Since Nezuk was an Ishtali mage, while being part of the Ascended Host, it suddenly makes sense why Ishtal didn't help Icathia in their rebellion against Shurima. Anyway, Nezuk went before the Emperor, and he pledged to create a weapon powerful enough to take fight to the void, and eradicate it at the source of its original eruption. By which he meant that he's going to close the rift in Icathia. Thank God he didn't want to destroy the Watchers. After many months of pushing his limits, Nezuk revealed what he simply called the Monolith. It was a floating fortress of living stone. It was maintained by the greatest elemental mages, and it was protected by other Ishtali god warriors. The monolith was the size of a city itself, and as it was slowly gliding towards the ruins of Icathia, lightning crackled from its inhibitors, fusing the sands beneath to glass, which left a shiny path behind it. Eventually, Nezuk and his superweapon arrived in Icathia, to put an end to the infinite darkness and its void-born abominations that spread from it. The battle raged for weeks. It was war on a scale Runeterra had never seen before. Remember, Mordekaiser's reign was yet to come. Nezuk unleashed torrents of magic, powerful enough to wipe civilizations and erase entire continents. And yet the void fought back with similar force. Its dark energies managed to crack the monolith and cut deep wounds into its living stone. These damaged parts were called Malphite, which is an Ishtali word for bad stone. The fortress was pushed to the very limits of its design, struggling to self-repair its weakened structure. And eventually, even this superweapon met its own breaking point. As Nezuk rallied the other Ascended for one last desperate charge, everything fell apart. The monolith crashed down to earth, digging through the bedrock of Icathia and opening a new path for the void right up there on the surface. Most of the monolith was lost within the dark abyss, vanishing into the silent nothingness beyond. But as pieces of it broke off during its fall, the rest rained down on the landscape that was now blackened by the terrible conflict. Only a single Ascended warrior survived. Nezuk himself climbed from the wreckage and fled for his life, choking on the ashes of what was meant to be his triumph. As time went on, somehow the fallen fragments of the monolith endured, still imbued with something like magical life. The shards that were scattered all over the place tried to heal, and they attempted to reform the body from which they broke off. But the ever-hungry void saw the shards as yet another vessel of life which it could consume. and so eventually the void drained all life essence from the living stone, leaving them as little more than stony shapes crawling in the dust. However, against all odds, a single shard remained. Buried deep beneath the surface, forgotten even by the abyss, it slowly gathered strength. The shard slept, alive, until at last it awakened centuries later, and it realized it was alone. In all the centuries since the Dark Day, the last shard of the monolith had become a legend in Runeterra. According to myths, people everywhere witnessed the shard with their own eyes. From Targon to Zaun, people could sometimes hear a tectonic roar in the deepest caverns, but sometimes it was also a quiet voice, humming to itself sounds it might remember from the world it once knew. Despite the enormous span of its existence, the overwhelming drive enkindled by Nezuk's creation of the monolith was not wavered. Now, Malphite knows it must soon rise to meet the darkness it once battled, as the void awakens to threaten all of Runeterra once more. That is the updated bio of Malphite, and honestly, that takes him right up to B tier at the very least. Honestly, I didn't expect this much effort put into Malphite's lore. Not only did they manage to keep Malphite's theme the same, as in previously he was an alien who broke off of his homeworld, and now Malphite is a shard that broke off of a Shuriman superweapon. But they even managed to keep the title the same. Malphite being the shard of the monolith now makes a lot more sense. But if you think about it, the story has really cool ties to Runeterra's historical events as well. First of all, we always thought that Icathia looks the way it looks because the land was corrupted by the void, but now we know there was a lot more in play. Yes, the void obviously taints the land it spreads across, but if the void could do this on its own, Icathia wouldn't be the only region with devastated landscape. Tokogol, which is an area where Vel'Koz is gathering information for the Watchers, should also look a bit more corrupted. And let's not forget about Freljord, where the Watchers themselves try to break into Runeterra. So now it makes more sense why the Icathian landscape is the only one that looks different. It's because on top of the void corruption, Nezuk blasted the region with enough power to vaporize entire continent. And as the story mentioned, it was because of this magic war that the lands of Icathia blackened. I just thought this was a cool detail hidden in the story. Next, we learned that Shurima allowed people from other regions to also become ascended. The ritual of ascension wasn't exclusive to native Shurimans, because as the story mentioned, Nezuk was an Ishtali mage who also was an ascended. And on top of that, the story mentioned that the monolith was protected by other Ishtali ascended, which means that Nezuk wasn't an exception either. This explains a lot, because if you remember Zillion's story, Zillion was an Icathian mage who traveled around the world, asking other regions to help them in the war against Shurima. And all the regions refused to go against the Shuriman Emperor, including the Icathian neighbor, which was Ishtal. Now it makes sense why Ishtal didn't want to fight the tyranny either. It's because they were already using the power of the Shuriman Sandisk too. But the reason why we have never even heard about an Ishtali ascended is because this story revealed that all of them died. All but Nezuk. Which takes us to the last question of this video. What happened to Nezuk? We know that after their defeat in Icathia, and after the Emperor died because of Zerath, 99% of all ascended slowly fell to madness, and they turned into the Darkin. Nasus, Renekton and Azir were one of the very few exceptions. So one could assume that even Nezuk turned into a Darkin eventually. But the thing is, we know about the gloves of Nezuk, which were hidden in his tomb. A tomb that was constructed by Shurimans in his honor. So it is likely that Nezuk died before the Darkin War even began. Because if Nezuk died during the Darkin War, whoever killed him would just steal his gloves. They wouldn't take the time to properly bury him in a tomb. But now you may be asking, what the heck am I even talking about? To which I say, you weren't paying attention when we talked about Ezreal, were you? Because of course, the legendary gauntlets of Nezuk, or at least one of them, is currently held by Ezreal. The other one disappeared together with Ezreal's parents when they found it. So the mystery of where is the other glove gets even more interesting now. Because not only is the glove connected to the most powerful ascended mage there ever was, the one who constructed a falling city that fell into the void, which by the way means that the void may spit the city back, so we may have a floating corrupted city on our hands. But Nezuk was also the one who got the closest to defeating the void. And this means that the gloves also technically belong to Malphite's father. So now I wonder, if Ezreal and Malphite ever meet, will Malphite call Ezreal daddy?
Got it.
Hey, did you know that we have social media and Twitch where we talk about other League facts and stories? And did you know that we have neat mugs and shirts too? The links to all of that will be below. And as always, thank you, come again.